As of this morning, meteorologists are watching something that's moved well past the keep an eye on it stage. A system in the Central Pacific, the same disturbance flagged just days ago with a 90% chance of organizing into a tropical depression, has now graduated into something far more concrete. The strong consensus of computer forecast models, both traditional and AI-based, now shows the system developing into a tropical storm or hurricane and tracking directly toward Hawaii this week. Current projections have it moving over or near the Hawaiian Islands late this coming Saturday into Sunday. One meteorologist covering the system put it about as plainly as forecasters ever do. Everyone in Hawaii should stay well informed this week. There is the potential for significant storm impacts. That's not a headline written to get clicks. That's the actual current professional assessment of a storm that is now closing in on one of the most isolated, storm-vulnerable populations in the United States. And because we've spent the last few videos walking through exactly why Hawaii's relationship with tropical systems is so different from the mainland's, this is the moment all of that context actually pays off. Today, we're breaking down exactly where this storm stands right now, what strong model consensus actually means at this stage of a storm's development, why the exact track over the next few days will determine everything about how bad this gets, what the realistic range of outcomes looks like based on how storms have behaved near these islands before, and what you can actually do with this information, whether you're in Hawaii or just watching this story unfold. No exaggeration, no manufactured dread, just where things actually stand as of today. Before we get into it, if you're in Hawaii right now, or you have family there, drop a comment and let me know what the mood is on the ground. Are people stocking up, or does it still feel like a normal week? I think there's real value in hearing from people actually inside the forecast cone rather than just reading model output from the outside. And if you want the most current updates on the storm as it develops over the next several days, subscribe to the channel. It's completely free and it helps us keep tracking this closely for you. A thumbs up helps too. Let's get this one to 6,000 likes so it reaches more people who need accurate current information instead of a recycled scary thumbnail. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with exactly what's known as of today, because the language forecasters are using has shifted meaningfully compared to just a few days ago. The system originated as a broad, disorganized area of low pressure, sitting roughly 700 miles southeast of the Hawaiian Islands, nearly stationary, first flagged by the Central Pacific Hurricane Center with a 90% chance of developing into a tropical depression within a week. That was the early stage watch. What's changed since then is significant. Forecasters are now describing a strong consensus among computer models, meaning multiple independent forecasting systems run using different methods and different underlying data are largely agreeing with each other on the same basic outcome. The system is expected to strengthen into a tropical storm or hurricane and track in the general direction of Hawaii over the coming days, with current guidance placing potential impacts to the islands late Saturday through Sunday. This matters because model consensus is one of the strongest signals meteorologists have for building confidence in a forecast. Any single computer model can produce an outlier result, a track or intensity forecast, that ends up being wrong once real-world data catches up to it. But when the major global models, along with newer AI-based forecasting tools that have become an increasingly important part of the modern forecasting toolkit, start converging on a similar outcome, that agreement substantially raises confidence that forecasters are looking at something close to the actual likely result, rather than one model's individual quirk. Here's what still isn't settled. And this is the part that matters most if you're actually in the storm's potential path. The exact track remains genuinely uncertain, and forecasters have been direct about this. There is currently no way to know which specific island, or which side of the islands, will be most affected. Small deviations in the storm's path over the next several days, deviations that are completely normal and expected at this range, could make an enormous difference in the ultimate scale and location of impacts. This is exactly why the official forecast cone graphic is shaped the way it is, wide near the far end of the forecast window, narrowing considerably as the storm gets closer and models converge on a sharper answer. It's worth pausing here because this is exactly the point in a storm's life cycle where the gap between responsible meteorology and panic content becomes the widest, and understanding that gap will make you a much better consumer of every update you see over the coming days. A strong model consensus on general strengthening and a general direction toward Hawaii is genuinely significant information. It tells us forecasters have real confidence that some kind of tropical system at some level of intensity is going to interact meaningfully with the islands this weekend. That's a substantial shift from the earlier stage of this story, where we were talking about a disorganized disturbance with an uncertain future entirely. What consensus does not yet tell us is the storm's peak intensity, whether it arrives as a weakening tropical storm or a still strengthening hurricane, and it does not tell us the precise track, whether the center passes directly over Oahu, skirts south of the Big Island, or threads a path between the islands that spares any single one a direct hit while still bringing dangerous surf, wind, and rain to all of them simultaneously. This is the exact same uncertainty structure we walked through with Hurricane Lane back in 2018, a storm that never made direct landfall on any Hawaiian island, but still produced some of the highest tropical cyclone rainfall totals ever recorded anywhere in the United States, over 50 inches in parts of the Big Island, along with catastrophic flooding and landslides. It's also the same structure behind the 2023 disaster tied to Hurricane Dora, a storm that passed hundreds of miles south of the islands and still contributed to the deadliest wildfire event in modern American history, purely through the influence of its outer wind field on already dry conditions. The lesson from both of those events isn't wait to see if it makes landfall before taking it seriously. It's a storm's precise track determines the type of danger residents face, not whether danger exists at all. Current guidance places potential impacts to Hawaii, late Saturday through Sunday, which puts the islands roughly 5 to 6 days out from potential impact as of today. That window matters for two separate reasons, one meteorological and one entirely practical. Meteorologically, 5 to 6 days is still enough time for real, meaningful changes in both track and intensity. Storms in the Central Pacific are influenced by a complex mix of steering currents, including the position and strength of high-pressure systems sitting to the north that can shift in ways capable of altering a storm's path by dozens or even hundreds of miles over that time frame. It's also enough time for a storm to encounter changing ocean temperatures or wind shear that could cause it to strengthen faster than currently expected, weaken faster than expected, or even stall out entirely, the same way the parent disturbance did before this current bout of intensification even began. Forecasters have been explicit that slight deviations in the coming days are likely to shift the picture further, which is a normal expected part of tracking a system this far out, not a sign that the forecast itself is unreliable. Practically, 5 to 6 days is also exactly the amount of lead time emergency management agencies count on to get a population genuinely ready. This is meaningfully different from the kind of warning window we discussed with Cascadia's tsunami risk, where the time between shaking and wave arrival could be measured in minutes, not days. A slow-developing tropical system approaching Hawaii from well over 1,000 miles away gives residents and visitors a real window to secure property, review evacuation zones, and stock emergency supplies before the most dangerous conditions ever arrive. That's a genuine advantage. And it's exactly the kind of window public officials are urging people not to waste, either by dismissing the storm prematurely because it hasn't fully organized yet, or by waiting until the final 24 hours to start preparing once the track finally sharpens. It's worth taking a moment to look at what's happening on the other side of the country, because the contrast helps explain why forecasters are treating these two systems so differently, and it's a useful real-time example of the kind of nuanced risk communication we've talked about before. In the Atlantic, a separate system, located roughly a third of the way between Africa and the Caribbean, is also showing early signs of organization, and forecasters currently place the odds of it developing into at least a tropical depression in the high range. If it strengthens into a named storm, it would become Cristobal, the next name on this year's list. But the similarities largely end there. This system is expected to track toward the northeast Caribbean over the coming days, fighting the same two obstacles we discussed with the earlier Atlantic disturbance: Saharan dust drying out the surrounding atmosphere, and increasingly hostile upper-level wind shear as it nears the islands. Forecasters currently expect those negative factors to keep the system weak overall, giving it only a slight chance of ever reaching low-end tropical storm strength. This is a genuinely useful side-by-side comparison. Two systems, both under active watch by the same National Hurricane Center apparatus, both carrying real development potential, but sitting in dramatically different threat categories based entirely on the atmospheric environment each one has to develop within. The Hawaii-bound system is developing in conditions favorable enough that model consensus already points toward a tropical storm or hurricane with a real chance of significant island impact. The Atlantic system is fighting an environment actively working against it, with forecasters expecting it to struggle to even reach minimal tropical storm strength. Same monitoring rigor, same basin apparatus, genuinely different risk levels, which is exactly why responsible coverage treats them differently instead of lumping every system currently on a map into one undifferentiated, equally urgent storm alert. We've covered this in more depth before, but it's worth restating here, because it directly shapes what real preparedness looks like for the specific storm now approaching. Hawaii sits in a genuinely unusual position relative to most tropical cyclone risk zones on Earth. Storms approaching from the south and east frequently weaken as they move into cooler water and stronger wind shear, closer to the islands, which is part of why direct major hurricane landfalls remain historically rare compared to somewhere like the Gulf Coast or the southeastern United States. But rare doesn't mean low stakes, and it certainly doesn't mean the islands are somehow insulated from serious consequences when a storm does track close enough. Hurricane Iniki in 1992 remains the benchmark for what a direct hit can actually do. A Category 4 storm that struck Kauai head-on, killed 6 people, destroyed or severely damaged over 1 to 400 homes, and caused what was at the time the costliest natural disaster in Hawaii's history, with recovery on the island stretching across years rather than months. But as we discussed with Hurricane Lane and Hurricane Dora, direct landfall isn't actually the primary threshold for serious harm in Hawaii. Rainfall-driven flooding and landslides, dangerous surf and rip currents along the coastline, and secondary hazards like wildfire risk fueled by a storm's outer wind field interacting with already dry vegetation have all proven, in recent memory, capable of producing consequences just as severe as a direct hit, sometimes worse. This is exactly why local meteorologists covering this developing system have been careful with their language, describing conditions like moderate to breezy trade winds strengthening as the system approaches, small craft advisories already being extended for windier waters around. Maui County and the Big Island, a clear statement that impacts will remain highly track-dependent right up until the storm actually organizes and a firmer path emerges. That's not vague hedging for its own sake. It's an accurate reflection of a genuinely uncertain situation, communicated honestly instead of flattened into a single scary headline. Since this storm is currently in the process of climbing through exactly this ladder, it's worth walking through what each stage actually represents, because the terminology matters more than most viewers realize when it comes to understanding real risk. At the disturbance stage, where the system started, showers and thunderstorms exist over a broad area, but there's no well-defined center of rotation holding everything together. Once a closed, organized circulation forms around a center, with sustained winds up to 38 miles per hour, it becomes a tropical depression. Cross the 39 mile per hour threshold, and it earns an official name and becomes a tropical storm, at which point advisories, forecast cones, and formal warnings for potentially affected areas begin in earnest. Hurricane status arrives at sustained winds of 74 miles per hour or higher, and from there, the storm gets categorized on the familiar 1 through 5 scale based on wind speed alone, even though wind is often not the most dangerous element of a Hawaii-bound system, as Lane and Dora both demonstrated. The system currently approaching Hawaii is expected to cross several of these thresholds over the coming days, moving from disturbance to depression to, per the current strong model consensus, a tropical storm or hurricane by the time it nears the islands this weekend. Each of these transitions will come with updated official guidance, sharper track projections, and, if warranted, formal watches or warnings issued for specific islands or portions of islands. This is the stage where paying attention to official Central Pacific Hurricane Center updates, rather than early speculative graphics, becomes genuinely important, because the picture here is going to keep sharpening meaningfully with each passing day. If this storm's development feels like part of a larger pattern we've mentioned before, that's because it is. The Central Pacific hurricane season was forecast months ago to run well above average, with government forecasters projecting as many as 13 named storms or tropical depressions in the basin this year, more than double a typical season's 4 or 5. The driving force behind that elevated outlook is a strengthening El Niño pattern, the same climate signal we've discussed in earlier videos, which tends to warm the central and eastern Pacific while reducing wind shear across the exact stretch of ocean this storm has been developing in. That same El Niño pattern is having close to the opposite effect in the Atlantic, which is precisely why the Cristobal candidate we discussed a moment ago is fighting an environment actively working against it, while the Hawaii-bound system has developed in about as favorable a setup as this basin produces. This isn't coincidence, and it isn't unprecedented. It's the seasonal outlook that forecasting agencies published months before this specific storm ever existed, now playing out largely on schedule. The system approaching Hawaii this week is, in a very real sense, the exact kind of storm this season was expected to produce, arriving in the exact window, August through September, when Central Pacific activity historically peaks. This is the part of the story that matters most, and it's worth being specific rather than generic about it. First, know your evacuation zone now, before the track sharpens any further. Every county in Hawaii publishes tsunami and flood evacuation zone maps, and coastal residents in particular should know in advance whether their home sits in a zone that could require evacuation, rather than trying to figure that out during the final 24 hours before potential impact. Second, treat this as the moment to finish, not start your emergency preparations. With 5 to 6 days of lead time, there's no excuse to be scrambling for water, non-perishable food, batteries, and medication in the final hours before a storm's closest approach, the way so many residents were forced to during the shorter notice events tied to past Central Pacific systems. Aim for enough supplies to be self-sufficient for at least a week, since a direct or near direct impact could disrupt shipping and supply chains on islands that depend heavily on ocean and air freight for a large share of daily goods. Third, remember that wind category alone won't tell you the full story here. Given what Lane and Dora both demonstrated, pay close attention to rainfall and flash flood guidance. As this storm approaches, not just wind speed forecasts, since flooding and landslides have historically caused as much or more damage in Hawaii as wind ever has. If you're near the coast, understand that dangerous surf, rip currents, and elevated surge can arrive well before and extend well beyond the storm's formal center, regardless of whether the official track shows a direct hit on your specific island. And fourth, get your information from official sources, specifically the Central Pacific Hurricane Center and local National Weather Service offices in Honolulu, rather than from viral graphics or secondhand screenshots that may already be outdated by the time you see them. This storm's forecast will continue to sharpen meaningfully over the coming days, and the difference between a stale 48-hour-old graphic and the current official update could genuinely be the difference between adequate and inadequate preparation. If you're not in Hawaii, this story is still worth following closely, and not just out of curiosity. This storm sits at almost the perfect intersection of everything we've covered. Across recent videos, an active Central Pacific season driven by a well-forecast climate pattern, the unique vulnerability profile of an island chain that doesn't need a direct hit to suffer serious consequences, and a real-time demonstration of how forecasters communicate genuine uncertainty honestly, rather than either downplaying or exaggerating a developing threat. It's also a useful moment to check your own hurricane preparedness if you live anywhere along the Gulf Coast, the southeastern United States, or the Caribbean, since we're now moving into the portion of the Atlantic season, mid-August through mid-October, that historically produces the overwhelming majority of the year's significant activity. The Cristobal candidate currently struggling in the Atlantic may fizzle, exactly as forecasters currently expect, but it won't be the last system this basin produces before the season's true peak arrives. Here's what's worth taking away from where things stand today. A tropical system that started the week as a disorganized, distant disturbance has, in just a matter of days, become a storm that strong model consensus now expects to reach tropical storm or hurricane strength and track over or near the Hawaiian Islands by this weekend. That's a genuine, serious development, not a manufactured one, and it deserves the kind of close attention forecasters themselves are now recommending for anyone in the islands. At the same time, the honest picture right now is still one of real uncertainty around exact track and peak intensity, the two factors that will ultimately determine whether this becomes a moderate rain and wind event for the islands, or something closer to the kind of serious, sustained impact Hawaii has experienced only a handful of times in the past several decades. That uncertainty isn't a reason to dismiss the threat. It's a reason to prepare now, thoroughly and calmly, while there's still meaningful time to do so, exactly the way emergency officials across the islands are currently urging residents to do. We'll be tracking this storm closely over the next several days, every model update, every shift in the projected track, and every official watch or warning as it's issued. This is very likely to be the most consequential storm we've covered together so far this season, and we want to make sure you have the most current, accurate picture of it, not a stale one. Subscribe so you don't miss any of the updates, and drop a comment letting me know if you're in Hawaii, have travel plans there this weekend, or are simply watching this story unfold from somewhere else. Let's get this one to 6,000 likes so it reaches the people who genuinely need this information this week. Stay prepared, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next one.